So today's video is going to be all about my experience sitting the Ucat. I have sat the Ucat test 2 years in a row. The first time I sat it was a little bit of a disaster and the second time was slightly better. So I thought today it would be useful for me to share my experiences of sitting the Ucat and how I think I improved my score the second time round, because it eventually led to me getting an offer to study medicine, and I'm starting medicine this September, which is about a month away now, so it's getting close. So if you are sitting the Ucat this year, then stick around because hopefully it could be useful to hear from someone who has sat the test twice and been able to sort of learn from their mistakes. If you're new here, my name is Lydia and I have an Instagram page at Lydia Martin Medic you can follow, where I'm going to be documenting my journey at medical school, and also subscribe to this channel if you are applying to medicine or just interested in considering applying to medicine, because I am making lots of videos this summer on my experiences with applying and my tips and tricks for hopefully getting an offer. Let's get into the video. The first time I sat the Ucat was in 2018, which is now 2 years ago. I had just finished uni and I knew I wanted to apply to graduate entry medicine, and that meant obviously that I had to sit the Ucat test. So I signed up for the test. I was a little bit naive, to be honest. I watched a few YouTube videos on the subject and I started to look at practice papers, but in my head I was kind of like, how hard can it be type thing. And I'd read a few people saying that they'd done 2 weeks of practice and come out with a really good score, so I was kind of chilled out about it. I booked my test in for late August and I don't think I even looked at practicing until sort of late July. Anyway, it got to July, I started to do some practice, mainly from the textbook I had, which was the Kaplan Preparing for the Ucat book. I'll put a picture of it here. I can't remember the exact title. So I used that book to help me practice. I didn't do any online practice, I just used this book, and it was useful, it was helpful at teaching me how to answer the types of questions and things like that. But in the whole, I wasn't really doing a lot of practice. Anyway, August came around and my test was like a week away, and long story short, I definitely wasn't ready, so I delayed the test by a month. The issue with this was that I was going to Bali for a month in September and I booked the test for the week after I got back. And I was so naive, I was like, I'm gonna definitely revise while I'm in Bali. So I took the massive Kaplan book with me in my suitcase, and I think I looked at it probably twice when I was out there, once when I was by the pool and once when I was on the plane home. So as you can imagine, when the test day came round a week after I got back from Bali, I wasn't ready. But I'm quite an optimistic person and I was definitely naively optimistic at the time, and I sat the test thinking that by some miracle I would come out with a score high enough to apply to graduate entry medicine. Anyway, that was not the case. I got my scores back after I'd sat the test and I can actually read those to you now. So the first time I sat the Ucat, I got 590 in verbal reasoning, 570 in decision making, 610 in quantitative reasoning, which was a complete fluke, 700 in abstract reasoning, and I got band 2 in situational judgment. So my total score the first time I sat it was 2,450, which isn't really high enough for most graduate entry to medicine courses, especially when I didn't really have a lot of work experience. I think for Warwick that score may have been just about acceptable, but I hadn't had the work experience for Warwick. So anyway, that was my score. I took my little score sheet, I went and sat in Starbucks and I cried. But at the end of the day, I had nobody to blame but myself. I wasn't really very well prepared at all. I ended up applying for medicine anyway that year. I applied for 4 graduate entry medicine unis and I got 4 rejections prior to interview. If you want to hear any more about that application process I did make a video about both times that I applied to medicine. So that was the first time I sat the Ucat. Mistakes were made. So basically I had 4 rejections that year, did not get into medicine. That's when I went on to do teaching. If you want to go back and look at my journey to medicine video, you can hear all about that in that video. But this is purely Ucat today, so let's stick to that. I got 4 rejections and then I decided that I would apply all over again because I still wanted to get into medicine, and this time I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't be so cocky and I would work really hard at the Ucat. So the second time I sat the test, this time I was raring to go. I wasn't working as much this summer. That's something I didn't mention. The year before I was working full-time in a restaurant, and I did just find it really hard to find the motivation. The following summer in 2019, I was only doing a few shifts a week and I had more free time to be able to practice. So 2019 rolls round. It's time for application cycle number 2. This time I'm raring to go. I booked my test for late July and I say I'm going to do 4 weeks of revision for the Ucat. I bought myself a subscription to Medify. Now I would absolutely recommend Medify. You've probably almost definitely heard of it, but it is just the best website, to be honest, in my opinion. I'm not sponsored, but definitely would recommend Medify. I like the way that you can track your progress and you can see the graphs of how you're improving or not improving, and you can pick out certain question types and use those to practice. What I always recommend to everybody. I bought myself a month subscription to Medify, and for a month I was actually really good. I think the main thing I did well was making sure that I had 2 or 3 hours a day dedicated to Ucat practice. And I said to myself, you can still enjoy your summer and, you know, work, but if you have 2 or 3 hours a day where you are just doing Ucat practice, it's not actually that much. It's manageable, but it's enough to start improving your scores. So yeah, I would timetable in 2 to 3 hours a day of Ucat practice. At the start, I would just pick one question type. So I would do a day of 2 hours of verbal reasoning, 2 hours of quantitative reasoning, and so on. I even had a calendar basically where I just said exactly what I was going to do every day. And then I'd say about 2 weeks to 10 days before my test, I started doing mocks every day. I think the main thing to remember is there are going to be days where you don't score as high or you're not feeling like you're making any improvement, and you just have to keep going with it. You might have a bad day, like especially with quantitative reasoning, I used to really struggle with it, and like even though I knew all the equations, I just couldn't do the maths that quickly in my head. Just really struggled with quantitative reasoning, and I thought there's no way I'm going to get a high enough score on the day. But you just got to keep going with it. Just trust that if you're consistent with your practice, that you will get better. Definitely one of the main things I did differently was organise my time better and practice more every day consistently for a month. I then made a small mistake because it got to a few days before my test and I just panicked. I felt like I wasn't ready, even though I was getting quite high scores in my mocks. And I delayed the test till September. So I put the test back 6 weeks, which honestly I would not recommend doing. I think I was in the zone. I was as ready as I was ever going to be, and I just delayed it by 6 weeks. And in that 6 weeks, I was going on holiday for 2 weeks. That was so stupid on my part, but I just really was nervous, and I think it's just a small error. So I delayed my test by 6 weeks to September. Then I had about a 3-week lull where I just stopped, and then as the test was getting closer, I did about another 2 or 3 weeks of practice. I honestly don't think you need to do, you know, like 8 to 10 weeks of practice really. Like maybe you could do it for that long but shorter amounts, but like with the intensity I was doing it at, you can't really keep that up. It's not really, you know, it's a lot to do for a long amount of time. I kept going with Edify. I also had my Kaplan book. September came around, it was my test day. I was feeling pretty okay on the test day. I was really nervous because in my head this was going to be the last time I applied medicine. I think I was thinking I was going to give up this time around. I think something I found hard the first time was like you don't know what to expect on the test day. Going into it the second time, at least I already knew what to expect when I got to the test centre. I sat the test. I think overall I performed the best I was ever going to. My scores aren't like, you know, 3,000, like 750 to 800 on every section. Like I don't think I was ever going to get to that point because I really struggled just with panicking under time pressure. So I just had to do the best I could with my own ability and like the time pressure basically. These are my scores from the second time I sat the Ucat. In verbal reasoning I got 670, in decision making I got 720, in quantitative reasoning I got 700, in abstract reasoning I got 660, and in situational judgment I got band 3. So I managed to improve my score by 80 in verbal reasoning, 150 in decision making, 90 in quantitative reasoning, and I went down by 40 in abstract reasoning. I just wasn't there on the day apparently. And my overall score was 2,750. So I went from a score of 2,450 to 2,750, which for me is a massive improvement, and it was enough to give me the confidence to apply to some graduate entry schools. I decided that that score of 2,750, even though I think it was in the top 15% of scores, so it was a high score, I did do well. I think the fact that I'd been humbled by my lower score the first time I sat it definitely gave me the kick up the arse that I needed to, you know, really put my foot down on the gas pedal and do the practice. So I had the confidence to then go and apply to 2 graduate entry courses, so Southampton and King's. And I also applied to 2 undergraduate courses because I wanted to see what my chances were on those, and I've ended up getting an offer from Southampton to study on the undergraduate course. I did receive an interview for graduate entry, so my Ucat score was good enough for a graduate entry interview at Southampton. I guess my main piece of advice here is that even if your Ucat score isn't 3,000 or even if it's not as high as some scores that you see, like, you still have a chance. You should still apply and just be tactical with where you apply. I'd recommend having a look at the data if you can from previous years. What is the lowest Ucat score they interviewed last year? Look at the stats. If somebody turns around to you and says, no, they don't interview anyone with a Ucat score lower than blah, 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 that doesn't mean anything, because I read that Southampton didn't interview anyone with a Ucat score lower than 2,900, and I had 2,750 and they interviewed me. So whoever told me that stat was false. So that's all I would say. Like, depending on where you get your information from, if it's somebody on the student room, some people on there act like they know exactly what they're talking about, and sometimes they just don't. However, if you get, you know, actual data from the university and they say, you know, we've never interviewed anyone with a score that low, maybe it would be better to utilise a place on your UCAS form at a different university. I think my main takeaways from this video and my experiences would be to be prepared and be consistent in your approach to revising. Do little and often rather than cramming a week's worth of revision into 1 week. I think just a consistent approach over 4 to 6 weeks works best, or at least that's what I found. Don't underestimate it. You need to get used to the layout and the timings of the test. Don't underestimate it, but at the same time, it's not as scary on the day as you think it's going to be. Just relax and try your very best. Remember that even if you don't come out with the score that you wanted, there will still be options. There are still universities that you can apply for. Just worry about that when you get to that point. And for now, just keep going with practice. If you are sitting the Ucat this year, I do wish you the best of luck. As always, if you have any questions, leave them down below, or you can message me on my Instagram, which I will also link in the description. I think that's everything for today. Hopefully I will see you in the next video. Bye!